In today's tutorial, we're going to be talking about how pH works in the body. We're also going to be sort of loosely linking it into diet because there are some people, some quite big supporters of an alkaline diet and trying to explain the pH mechanism and how it works in the body. And there are also some people who challenge this idea that pH has an effect on health and is the diet useful and things like that. So what we're going to do, we're going to go and explore how pH works in the body. I've got the reference below from the textbook where I got this information. So again, you can go and look that up and look this up and sort of, in a sense, build your own idea around this subject rather than just listening to either supporters or challengers of the idea. So to help us understand how this pH mechanism works and how we can start to link nutrition and diet and health into it, what we're going to do is going to build some pieces and look at this this mechanism that's going on within the body that maintains and keeps it healthy. So for a person to remain healthy, physiological conditions in the body must be optimal. So these are key words that we need to understand, and we need to put into context what these words mean. So what we're going to do as we go through, we'll start to do that. And they are closely regulated. So what we have is an external environment, and that's the air and water that's around us. Then we have an internal environment, which are the extracellular fluids, and that is where our organs, tissues, and cells lie, essentially. Then what we have is the inside of the cell, and that's known as the extracellular fluid. So we can look at it like this. So we've got intracellular fluids, that's the inside of the cell. Then on the outside of the cell, we've got extracellular fluids. And then outside of that, we've got the external environment. So that's, in some respects, how we are looking at it. And our cells interact with the external environment through the internal environment. So what can happen within here can be influenced by what is happening out here. And obviously what can happen in here can also be influenced by what's going on in here. So in some respects, they are linked like that. There is a lag time between each affecting the other. But what that starts to tell us is that the food that we eat can have an effect on the internal environment. And as we work through, so that's sort of, I guess, point number one, is what we eat can have an effect on the internal environment. So what we need to be able to do is understand how this then affects the pH within the body. For cells to function optimally and organs to function optimally, there need to be several facets of the internal environment need to be maintained within narrow limits. So what we've got here, so we have got pH, so mineral concentration between 7.35 and 7.45. So that's the narrow limit that they're talking about with regards to how the cell functions optimally. Now, it's not just that. You've got oxygen and carbon dioxide concentrations. You've got glucose concentrations and other metabolites. You've got osmotic pressure, and you've got the temperature. So again, when we're talking about pH, there are all of these that will, again, have an effect on the pH, because it's not just the pH that needs to be maintained in an optimal range. It's also all of these. Now, some are more sensitive than others. Some have narrower ranges than others. But departure from these optimal ranges may result in dysfunction, disease, or death. So the stability of the internal environment is the primary condition for a free and independent existence. So what does all this mean? Well, if we look at it like this, and you've got 7 point, what's in the middle of there? 7.4, let's say. And then you got 7.45 at the top, 7.35 at the bottom. So let's just say that's the sort of the middle line, the mean, the average. So the body is always doing this. Now, from metabolism, there are acids produced. So what that is trying to do, so this is more, get rid of that. This is more alkaline up here, and this is more acid down here. So just through metabolism, acids are being produced. So what the body has, so that will pull your pH or concentration down, or your mineral concentration down. What then the body has in place is its buffers. Now, obviously, they are stored internally in various different places. So what then happens is it then pulls back up. Again, metabolism happens, gets pulled back down, buffers release, gets pulled back up. So it's maintained in that way. So there are physiological mechanisms in place to maintain your mineral concentration. Now, the other important bit is this word stability. If I just put this again, now again, we don't need to worry about the numbers because the numbers are the same, but what is healthier is this sort of stable line or stable mechanism of it just gently going up and down. What is, let's just say, unstable is when it goes, flicks up and then drops, and then flicks up and then drops. That's what I would describe as unhealthy. So this stable line is healthy, and this more unstable, volatile type of line is unstable. So this is healthy, stable line, and this, let's just say, unstable, volatile line is unhealthy. So what we want to be doing is stabilizing that with the things that we eat and the way that we move and the way that we think and these types of things. So what we're going to do next is talk a little bit more about or start bringing in a little bit more the diet and nutrition aspect. So these internal functions, and that's the functions of the organs, the tissues and the cells, can be maintained. So as we get further and further away from this, let's just call it mean or average, as we get further and further away up here or even down here, the internal functions of the cells, the tissues and the organs become interfered with, and they don't function as well as they could. If we can keep it maintained and stable, then they function much more optimally. Now, this can be maintained when the external environment is changing. So if we've got intracellular fluids, extracellular fluids, and the external environment. So let's just say the external environment, we're in a very unhealthy, highly air polluted area. Our body can maintain good internal function, although the chemicals and the molecules and everything out here is extremely unhealthy. The body can maintain itself through physiological and behavioural mechanisms. Now, when we talk about behavioural, a part of that will be the things that we eat and drink, which is the diet. So diet and our behaviour can influence how our cells are functioning. So when you hear people talk about homeostasis is set, pH is set, the body takes care of it, it's not exactly, let's just say 100% true, because there are behavioural mechanisms that can influence it. Now, if we are in a completely healthy environment, again, if we are putting unhealthy foods in, so highly, let's just say, acidic foods, if we put them in, that will interfere within the extracellular fluids and the intracellular fluids, and that will affect this stability of pH within the body. So we have to understand the mechanism a little bit more and the things that influence it. So to optimal functioning, the body must sense change. So if pH alkalizes, the body will release acids to bring it down, which is essentially all I've explained so far. And if the pH acidifies, the body will release alkaline minerals to bring it back up, again, which is this mechanism here. So this can be achieved through physiological, so there are physiological mechanisms within the body that do that. But if there's too much acid or alkaline going in, which could be eating and drinking, which is more the behavioural mechanisms, again, that can override the body's physiological mechanisms. Now, there are different mechanisms within the body, which I will talk about in a future tutorial. So the longer we are away from optimal, the greater the chance we have from disease or death. And that brings us back to this stability here. So the longer we are further away, the greater chance we have of dysfunction, disease, or death. Obviously, the body will do everything it can to maintain optimal physiology, but it can only do so much. We as humans have to do our bit with how we move, how we eat, and how we think. So to summarise what we've talked about, there are essentially 2 points that I've brought through all of this tutorial. And the number one is the external environment can influence the internal environment. There is a lag time, but it can happen. And obviously the external environment, the air that we breathe in, also the food that we take in, will influence how our body works. The body can manage that through physiological mechanisms that it has there. But if there is too much coming in, then the body will eventually break down, let's say. So first it will just be dysfunction, then there will be some degree of disease, so symptoms will start to manifest themselves, and then if it goes on long enough, i.e. this can be over a prolonged period of time, I'm talking like 30, 40, 50 years, then death will eventually come of that. But again, it's in a way that sort of goes unnoticed by the individual over such time, but when they get later in life, then the real problems can manifest themselves. But as we are experiencing in the world today, those symptoms are manifesting themselves earlier and earlier in people's lives, and the disease and dysfunction is coming about quicker, and then which will eventually turn into death quicker. But what we do have is a medical system that is managing the symptoms. So people's quality of life isn't as great because they're just managing the symptoms for longer and longer periods, which isn't as effective as actually getting rid of the cause, which is the food and the drink that people are eating. So hopefully this has been helpful. Hopefully it's given you a better idea into the mechanisms that are going on within the body. So my name's Chris. I'll speak to you in the next tutorial.